to men's basketball live from the site of the Final Four in Dallas. Steve, we were talking about Jim Nantz last segment. Are you a fan of Jim Nantz? What do you think of his broadcasting?
Well, I've been listening to it for so long, guys. By the way, hello. I think it has a certain. You make certain associations when you hear his voice, and that's a plus, for him, like it is for anybody who's been doing a certain gig on television for a very long time. That said, I could find that Nance, and I really look at this through a golf lens too. Can sort of be a little religiously, serious and somber, and as he calls this action, and maybe lack a little of the kind of common touch that I probably prefer in an announcer. I think of Mike Tirico early in his career,
great broadcaster,
calling. Yes, but I agree completely. I think of him early in his career calling golf majors, though, and beginning to indoctrinate certain golf terminology into his manner of speech, things that he'd never say on a normal day, like at the last, referring to the 18th hole. And I find that kind of stuff, that kind of stiff, overly serious stuff to be a little bit off-putting. I've never really been asked about it. It's funny that that's just my own sense of I guess, personality and style when discussing sports. Everybody has their own preferences.
Exactly. Let's dive into the Final Four right now. Marcus Lee. Tom actually disagreed with me on this, saying it was because of another guy who was out for the Kentucky Wildcats.
Willie Cauley-Stein was out.
Right, exactly. So if you're watching this game from the sidelines, Steve, what do you think of Marcus Lee? You were there for the Elite Eight when Kentucky beat Michigan. Do you think this guy could be as impactful as he was against Michigan, and can he do it again versus Wisconsin, who's another big team?
No, I don't think so. First of all, we talk about a guy who comes out of nowhere for Kentucky. It's really kind of hilarious because he's a McDonald's All-American, for crying out loud. He's simply the freshman who prior to the last game hadn't played any meaningful minutes for Kentucky, but that doesn't mean that he won't someday, like maybe the rest of them, be looked upon as a potential NBA lottery pick. He's just skinny, really skinny. And it's funny, I cover Illinois a lot, and Illinois had a freshman this past season. I guess I don't know if we'd still call him a freshman or not. Their season's over, but named Austin Colbert. And he's a guy with a lot of upside, especially athletically. He's very tall, but he's very skinny. The Kentucky version of very skinny happens to be beefier than the Illinois version of very skinny, and which I think speaks to the difference between the program. But relative to the rest of the Wildcats, these freshmen are put together unbelievably well. I mean, they're grown men, so to speak, and this guy's not ready to play for just his physical constitution is not there yet. A team like Wisconsin, and especially knowing he's coming, I would think they can handle him, and it's really a break for Wisconsin that Willie Cauley-Stein is likely to be out of action for the Final Four, because he's somebody who's so good defensively at extending to the perimeter, and that Frank Kaminsky, really would have had a hard time. Frank the Tank, who's not just a tank, but he shoots threes. He can probably, I think Kaminsky can really affect this game more with Cauley-Stein out than he could have with Cauley-Stein in. Cauley-Stein played many more minutes than Kentucky's starting center, Dakari Johnson, during the season and all that. So there's no way Marcus Lee can replace Cauley-Stein's minutes, even let alone his production.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that too. Obviously, the loss of Cauley-Stein hurts this Wildcats team, but you mentioned it. They got a guy who barely played since January, but he's still a McDonald's All-American. So that obviously speaks to how good of a recruiter Calipari is. But looking at Frank Kaminsky and the Badgers, how do you see them matching up then? Obviously, is it going to be Dakari Johnson that's going to have to take on Kaminsky, or maybe Randall has to stretch out to him? And
right.
Also, are the Badgers going to be able to guard the Wildcats? Is Ben Brust going to be able to handle one of the Harrison twins, or can Kaminsky maybe handle Randall down low?
Well, the neat thing about looking at a matchup like this, you can apply all sorts of logic to it. You see, one guy's bigger than the other, one guy's more athletic than the other. Somebody's more experienced than somebody else. But the really good teams, they don't ever get blown out. When two really good teams are playing, two really, Kentucky in its case, the talent and peaking, in Wisconsin in its case, the discipline and the experience and all that, it's going to be a very close game. So it's tempting to look at individual matchups and draw conclusions based off that. But I think it's wiser to just think of the trend. I mean, when is Wisconsin? Does it match up athletically with Kentucky? It wouldn't necessarily seem so. But when's the last time they got blown out? They don't get blown out. And so I think that this will be a game that goes very late into the game with both teams having an opportunity to win. To me, Kentucky has players who can execute individually better than Wisconsin's presumably can if you have to create a shot. And I think if there's an edge, that's the edge that matters the most. That Kentucky has guys who can go get a shot off, and I don't think Wisconsin does. I think here Sam Decker probably should be doing that more than he's done. It should be more assertive on the offensive end, using his athleticism and all that, but he doesn't. That's kind of not his makeup. So they've got to get everything through their offense, and I think that, to me, if there's a factor that leads you to believe Kentucky will win, it's that late shot clock ability for Kentucky, almost anybody with the ball, to get a shot.
Wisconsin does have Ben Brust, and he's actually from around the area by me, so I'm excited to see what he can do against the Kentucky Wildcats. Let's switch over to the other matchup, though, Steve. Is Scotty Wilbekin the best point guard left in this tournament? I loved the plays he made against Dayton, against UCLA. When Florida needs some passing, when they need to get the ball to their best players, Patrick Young, other than that, Wilbekin does that. And then when Florida needs a shot, maybe when UCLA cut it to 6, Wilbekin comes back and just a ridiculous shot, fadeaway left-hander or right-hander off the glass, banker in. Is Wilbekin the best point guard to you left in this tournament?
I don't necessarily think so. I mean, he might be. Listen, you didn't mention either of these things, so I will. I think the biggest things about Wilbekin are, number one, defensively, he's probably the best point guard in the country. So that's a big thing right there. He's going to get a second crack at Shabazz Napier, who's kind of the player of the tournament so far, and Connecticut's the last team to beat Florida. Napier hit a buzzer beater in that game. Wilbekin got hurt in that game, but still Napier went off for 26 points. So this is a big opportunity for Wilbekin to kind of take another crack at Napier. But the other thing that really impresses me is if you look at at Florida's games in Memphis against UCLA and against Dayton, in 73 combined minutes, Wilbekin had 0 turnovers. So, he's not a traditional point guard. I don't know if I like, I like the Harrison brothers, Andrew Harrison, in particular as point guard for his ability to really break guys down. He's been doing it incredibly well in the tournament, getting into the lane and getting shots that way and getting dunks for teammates that way. Napier is a point guard of a certain kind. He's obviously an offensive point guard, and I think he's the most important individual player at the Final Four. So I don't necessarily think Wilbekin stands above the crowd at his position here, but he certainly has things he's doing that are remarkable and kind of going unnoticed and underappreciated.
Yeah, you mentioned Napier, and obviously, with UConn making this run to the Final Four, the comparisons are obviously being made to Kemba Walker, excuse me, and that 2011 championship run. Sort of a two-part question here is how much do you see Napier resembling that version of Kemba Walker? Obviously, Napier was a freshman on that team and much more of a assist guy, but now you mentioned he's the central part of this Huskies offense. And also for UConn, who's got to be the other guy to step up aside from Napier? Is it going to be Boatwright or maybe DeAndre Daniels? What do you think?
Yeah. Well, for one thing, I think Kemba Walker had better teammates. Had more talent around him. That Connecticut team was probably better than this one is, but this one has reached this point in really unlikely fashion. And I think Napier, if you're just making a Napier-Kemba Walker comparison, that Napier holds up very well. He has a level of experience having been a key guy, 7 points a game guy as a freshman for that national championship team. He has really had quite the career arc and gone much like Wilbekin. And by the way, I'm going to cut myself off and tell you that I'm seeing Cauley Stein walking right now in uniform in the tunnels of the stadium, but he has a Kentucky jersey on and a pair of red shorts on, so that would tell me he's not practicing. He's doing something other than going full go today. But anyway, I think that Napier is at least as well-rounded a player as Walker, and is having at least as good a tournament and postseason as Walker had. So, I think that's a they've got their lead guy, and their lead guy might be better than anybody else's lead guy here at the Final Four. And I think there was a second question in there. Well, will you tell me what that was?
Yeah. Sorry. Just aside from Napier, who does UConn going to need to step up? Is it going to be Boatwright or Daniels or one of the other guys?
Yeah. No, I think that the way they can beat Florida if they're going to beat them is to shoot them down. That leads me to believe it's on the perimeter, and that's Boatwright. They would need to do it just by shooting them down, right? By making an incredible percentage. Florida hasn't given up 70 points yet in the tournament. They've won every game by double digits, and they don't score a lot themselves. So I don't think that Connecticut can impose itself at all points of the half court, and get the ball inside and get good shots inside. I don't see that. Patrick Young is such a spectacular rim protector. He's such a presence defensively that I think that would have to be someone like Boatwright hitting threes in transition, catching Florida sort of before its defense is settled, hitting big shots. Interesting about Boatwright, just a couple of little facts. I don't know how much you've talked about him, but he was a co-Mr. Basketball in Illinois, in Aurora in 2011, and I found out here that he was recruited by some big schools, including by Tim Floyd then at USC when Boatwright was just an eighth grader. So this is somebody who, at some point in his life was considered to be kind of setting the bar for players his age, and he was probably expected to be, more of an impact player even than he's been. But he's been good in the tournament, and he's turned it on. And if he can do that again, and they have a 1-2 punch at guard, and guys who can just drill three after three and just be really disruptive. While Wilbekin's on Napier, Boatwright might get a lot of opportunities. And if he makes most of them, maybe there's another upset.
Quick little wrap-up question here, Steve. Are we going to see another 7-8 like UConn and Butler? Are we going to see UConn and Kentucky in the championship game, or what's the matchup going to be for you?
I'm not ready to go against Florida. I think Florida, you have to go back really far to find a team that came to the Final Four with a better season or better season of accomplishments than Florida has had. And everybody was flipping out about Kentucky a couple of years ago, Anthony Davis, that team, and they were great, no question about it. If Florida wins 2 games here, they finish with the same record that Kentucky team did.
Wow.
They both swept the SEC, unlike Florida, which has won 30 in a row. That Kentucky team lost in the SEC tournament. This is not this is a team that does it with defense and discipline and all those things, and so that makes them unlike the teams Connecticut has beaten. Connecticut beat an Iowa State team, for example, that wanted to go up and down and go one-on-one and outscore the other team. This is a completely different story. So I still like Florida among the 4 teams here. And if they don't win it all, and if they do wind up losing to Kentucky, which I think will advance, and then they will wind up 3-1 against this Kentucky team that was ranked number 1 in the preseason. It would be for sure the greatest resume ever for a national runner-up.
I want to see Kentucky, Florida in the national title game. People said the SEC was bad coming into this tournament. Florida, Tennessee, Kentucky, they all made runs. The SEC is a heck of a conference. Steve, thank you for joining us here on the lineup, and we'd love to have you back on soon.